recording, yeah, you can see the pop-up window right now. The recording may be shared with others who are not here. So if you do not want to appear in the recording, you can turn off your camera. And here are our 4 team members, including myself, Macy, Joan, and Fontaine. And we have a special team member, Smokey the Bear, who is also our mascot. And today we will open our presentation by giving you an overview of our problem space. And then we will go deep into our research portion, including the research objective and questions, methodology we use, and insight we gain. At the end, we will share with you our design implication followed by a discussion. So as you may already know, wildfires are becoming more intense and frequent across the globe due to climate change. And the past 2020 has witnessed the most active fire year on record for the West Coast of the United States. The impacts of these wildfires are enormous. They affect the environment by endangering animals and contaminating their habitats, changing the soil and water chemistry and emitting greenhouse gases. Additionally, smoke from wildfires pollutes the air and can travel thousands of miles, exposing multiple cities to particulate matter that negatively affects people's cardiovascular health, including asthma, bronchitis, chest pain, and lung illness. And these consequences above have enormous financial repercussions, ranging from direct costs of fire suppression efforts and property repair to indirect costs of healthcare use and spending. However, managing wildfires is a complex task which involves multiple agencies. To give you an idea of how complex wildland fire management is, here is a picture of all the people that might be involved in a fire response. Not only are there people on the ground in operations, but you also have to consider planning, logistics, finance, policy as the fire is going bigger. And besides, every fire starts as a type 5 incident, which is the smallest fire involving 2 to 6 personnel. A fire will increase in complexity and can develop up to type 1 incident if it is not suppressed promptly. And when a fire develops to type 2 incidents, state support will come in. And when it develops to type 1 incidents, local, state, federal agency will respond collaboratively to suppress it. So the complexity of wildland fire and its management has made fire suppression extremely challenging. On July 2nd, 1994, lightning sparkled a fire near the base of Stone Key Mountain, 7 miles west of Glenwood Springs, Colorado. 4 days later, 20 hotshots were rushed to the fire to aim in a battle. However, that afternoon, a dry cold front passed through the area, increasing the wind and fire activity. 12 firefighters were unable to outrun the blaze and died. 2 more habitat firefighters were also killed as they tried to flee to the northwest. On October 25, 2013, a hunter became lost in the Cleveland National Forest, San Diego, and lit a small fire to signal for help. Unfortunately, it quickly spread out of control. Although the fire rescue department responded with 15 engine companies, 11 brush rigs, 9 trucks company, and 2 airpod firefighting rigs, the fire still took away lives of 14 civilians and 1 firefighter. On June 28, 2013, lightning ignited a wildfire near Yannell, Arizona. A group of 25 fighters went to protect the small town from the advancing blaze. However, the fire abruptly changed its direction. All but 1 firefighter died. Tragedy fires such as this are often attributed to a few well-known common denominators of fire behaviors, particularly the first and the second one in this list on your left-hand side. Most incidents happen on smaller fires or deceptively quiet areas of large fires. And unexpected shift in wind direction and speed also leads to tragedy fires. In addition, human factors play a huge role in these tragedy fires, particularly the last one, poor communication and miscommunication. People misunderstand things, make assumptions on information they are provided, and some of them even avoid communication. So together, failures in communication resulting from technology, fire behavior, and human factors can lead to deadly consequences and tragedy. This led us to research on communications of critical information in wildland fire response. In the first round of our research, we want to have a comprehensive understanding of how critical information is communicated across different roles and agencies. So our research questions include who is involved in the communication of critical information, what information is critical for effective wildfire response on the ground, and how is the information communicated, shared, and received, and what is the experience of those fighting wildfires. After having a clear idea of how critical information is communicated across different roles and agencies, we narrowed down our scope and to identify the current development of resources tracking system, their limitations, and how they can assist with decision making. So our questions include what tracking tools and system are fire departments currently using? How are fire personnel being located without a tracker? What are the barriers and limitations to personnel tracking? How can information about the location of personnel be utilized for decision-making? And lastly, what other types of information is critical but haven't been tracked yet? To answer our research question, we have selected the following methods. In the data collection phase, we chose lit review, competitive analysis, semi-structured interviews to collect data. So for the lit review, we have reviewed the existing policy and processes. For example, the Red Book and the Incident Response Pocket Guide. We've also read several series accident investigation reports to find a communication issue that contributed to this tragedy fires. For the competitive analysis, we looked at existing tools and platforms that addressed issues associated with communication and resource tracking. In terms of the interview, we use snowball recruiting, social media, professional networks, and direct contact to help us recruit 19 participants for our semi-structured interviews. And the 19 participants we interviewed covers all the sections in the incident command system. And during the interview, we also employed the critical incident technique to elicit information about participants' experiences and observations of the communication issue. So in the data analysis and synthesis phase, we use thematic analysis method to closely examine the data and identify common themes through affinity diagramming. After the interview, we generated a list of themes and systematically coded interview transcript with themes and research questions. We then queried the data together by themes across all the participants, so we could start looking for patterns. To synthesize our data, we affinitize pain points and opportunities into categories and subcategories and discuss each of them to put our main takeaways. We then connected categories and subcategories that were related to each other. And now Fontaine will share with you what we've learned about communication of critical information in wildland fire response.
Thank you, Ran. Yeah, so I'll take you through, or I'll start to take you through some of the main things that we learned about this area. And there's a lot to learn. And for our research participants and interviewees who are here, we hope we've accurately captured the challenges and experiences that you've told us. And, if we haven't, please don't hesitate to let us know. But yeah, I'll go through them now. Sorry, there's a bit of a delay, I think. Oh, there we go. So the first thing we want to emphasize is that how key radios are for communication. And this was something we didn't know before, is that the two-way portable radios are the primary form of communication for all sorts of information, including emergency information, situational information, and logistical information. And so as we hear from one of our interviewees here, radios simply work. And there's a lot of radio usage because, yeah, that's just it. They simply work. And there's always a place for radios in the mix, no matter what. And the communication guidelines from the NIFC Red Book, which again is that federal book of standards and best practices for fire management, is that cellular, smartphone, and satellite telephones will not be used to communicate tactical or operational traffic unless no other means are available. And so radios are the primary method of communicating all of this important information, but they're definitely not perfect. Well, nobody said they are either, but there's about a list of 10 different radios that are approved at both the federal, state, and local level, and they're approved for the reason of interoperability, right? So we have to make sure that all the different radios are able to communicate with each other. And then there's also this need to coordinate assigned frequencies between agencies, and there's a lot of maintenance and programming and cloning that's associated with that. So we heard there'll be a role of a communications technician on the fire ground, and their job is to show up to the fire, and they're given a briefing on what's happening with the fire, where it's going, and what equipment has been ordered, and then they have to decide if they need anything else. And so they'll sit down, they'll come up with a game plan for what they need, and have to get the assigned frequencies and know what frequencies to use, and then program them, and then everybody has to come in and have their radios cloned each day to make sure that they're listening to the right channels. And there are a ton of different channels that you can listen to. And so there's a lot that goes on there in order to coordinate all this communication. And then in terms of maintenance as well, something we have to consider for this physical technology is battery life. And so most of these radios are AA battery powered. And we actually saw that in a busy fire season, in one day, they said you can use up to 172,000 AA batteries in a day. So that's quite a lot. And so we have to think about all these issues when we're thinking about using radios as the primary form of communication. But there are other technology that's also being used, and more now, given the modern times we're in. So, everybody has a cell phone these days, and it's used to using cell phones. And so sometimes they will get caches of cell phones from Verizon's critical response team, and instead of running real phone lines, they say they can hand out cell phones. And if there's no service, then maybe you'll bring in phone lines from a commercial provider such as AT&T and Verizon. And then as, I guess, a last resort, or if needed, then you might go over to satellite and satellite phones. But generally, you'll try to use that last because it is the most expensive, and there are also infrastructure restrictions associated with that. And that brings us to our second insight, is unreliable connectivity. And connectivity, no matter what you use, is just this huge challenge in this area. So when you're in forest and rural areas where connectivity is limited, it makes it difficult to utilize a lot of these technologies that are already out there without Wi-Fi, without internet, without cellular connection. And it really is the primary barrier that we heard over and over again in our interviews. So as we see here, this person saying, I think our biggest hurdle is connectivity. It's always going to be connectivity. And once you bridge the connectivity gap, then that's when all these other things can fall into place. Oops, sorry. Can you go back to I accidentally clicked the link on the bottom. Thank you. So let's just full screen that. Oops. Yeah, so connectivity is essential. And here, this incident meteorologist we talked to as well says that, I can already do so much digitally, but I have to be able to talk to you, right? I have to be able to make that link. And, the link is between we have to think about the link between people to people and people to technology, and then also the link between technology and technology. And all of those need connectivity in order to function and be connected. And so there are ways to boost coverage. When you're using radio, for example, you might, you can link radio repeaters in remote areas. And so when it's not working well, what we heard is that in the middle of the wilderness, you can set up these repeaters in order to communicate. And sometimes it's even like an aircraft flying over, and then you go onto a mountain somewhere and you're putting up a repeater in order to boost that connectivity. And sometimes as well, we've heard that you might use aircrafts as messengers for information. If it's very, very critical, the aircraft might be able to get closer, right, to somebody that's out in a remote area. But that's something that they will have to do in addition to all the other things that they've already got going on. So that can be a challenge. And then, of course, there's also partnerships with private sector, such as their cellular providers or internet providers. So we heard about FirstNet is one of the ones that is worked with a lot, and they're under AT&T. And you might go when you need better connectivity. So you might go to these providers and ask them, like, in a certain area, what can you do in this area to help boost connectivity? And then sometimes there's also teams like Cisco's TAC Ops. We talked to somebody who used to work on that team, actually. And so they actually have these mobile network and satellite communication and command centers. For example, like the picture you're seeing here, where if they're called in, then they can drive out to certain areas and they have the satellite dish attached, and they'll do things like set up Wi-Fi in certain areas or voice over IP services, that sort of thing. And that can even sometimes be used for personal reasons for firefighters who might, want internet connectivity to talk to family or get back to do some of the life things that they need to do. So there are multiple reasons for doing that. And then we also talked to a few people who said, hopefully in the future, with some of the things that, for example, Starlink is doing, we can use new technology like that to bridge that gap. And hopefully it will be less of an issue in the future as we move along in terms of technology. But essentially right now, the challenges still remain and will probably always remain. So even though you can do things to boost and get better coverage, there are still going to be gaps. And so here, what we heard, you might have a group come out and they've done their best to try to meet that connectivity need. You'll bring things like the cows out or the satellite cellular technology out, and you'll roll up to the incident and you drop them off base camp, and they might say, well, okay, we've brought connectivity out to you. We have a wildfire cellular coverage. And here he's saying that, you gave, well, yes, we have coverage now in camp, but I still have nothing out on the line because I'm 30 miles from camp. And so it's sort of this ongoing challenge to get the connectivity where you need it, right? You'll have it in a certain radius, but you have to keep going and, try to cover all the gaps you need. And our third insight then is personal safety. Personal safety is the top priority during fire incidents. And what we've heard was that personnel tracking is a key factor to accomplishing this. And so here again, according to the Red Book, and just pretty much everyone we talk to, right, the foundation of wildland firefighting is to keep people safe, and that becomes before everything else. So the safety of firefighters and, of course, of the public. And to do that, you need to know where people are. So we need good personnel tracking. And what we heard here was, we track aircrafts already, we track vehicles already, but we don't track people. And that's obviously the most critical thing to track, because you can't replace people, but you can replace equipment. And people are not currently being tracked accurately to the level that they were talking about, right? And so they're talking about being able to track individual people, their GPS location on a fire. And if something was to happen out to them and they're out in a remote area, and if they're no longer answering radio, instead of randomly starting a search pattern to try and find people, they're going to be able to go to their last known location on a map somewhere, or to be able to know within plus or minus a couple hundred meters where the people are. And that can save lives. And right now there aren't standardized processes to be able to do so, right? What we heard is that everybody has their own strategy. And we did hear about various tools right now in order to do various sorts of resource tracking and personnel tracking. And there are a lot of third-party tools out there already, actually, and some are used for hiking, for recreation, and some are used by the military. But nothing is widely used across for fire. It also doesn't provide tracking to the level of detail that would be needed to do what we were just talking about. And it's more tracking right now on this higher level of knowing where people are. And so who actually needs to know that level of detail, right? The need to know details of personnel tracking differ depending on the type of fire it is and your role in the incident command system. And when we talked to an incident commander and who'd worked on a lot of larger fires, so like type 2 or type 1 fires, he actually said, well, I don't need to, and there's no way I can know where everybody is, but I do need to account for where everybody is on that higher level, but it's too much to be able to track where every single person is. But it is the responsibility of the people under him, so division supervisors, to be able to know where all of their people are, and everybody will be responsible for a certain number of people, and they're the ones out on the fire line who will be who will have to keep track of where everybody is, often in their head, and then report back to whoever they usually report back to. That everybody is accounted for and where everybody is. And then so he'll have that broader view of things, and then everybody else will have a more minute detail of where everybody is. For smaller fires, though, he said that you might need to know where everybody is. It really just depends on the situation. He might be more hands-on. And we know that these situations change very quickly. So depending on what that can be, what you need to know will also change very quickly. And what breakdowns where challenges occur essentially will happen in moments of transition or in moments of duress, or when you're overloaded, essentially. So when the fire escalates quickly, which can happen, or when new crews come in from other agencies in the area, that's when you might have a bit more chaos and confusion, and gaps can happen. And then of course, human factors, again, setting in when you're exhausting, it makes it difficult to keep track of everybody, especially if you have to keep track of everybody in your head. And that leads into, our fourth insight is just simply overexertion. Wildland firefighters are under heavy mental and physical loads that affect their observation skills, their capacity to respond to changing situations, and decision-making capabilities. When we talk about mental load, so that can come on from taking on multiple roles, and that happens quite often. It can come on simply from just having too much information out there to keep track of. And it results in, when you are mentally overloaded, you might default to what is familiar or default to training in dangerous situations and situations that change rapidly, when actually you should be adjusting the plan, or you need to adjust quickly. And of course, there's also a mental health risk. We know that firefighters are at higher risk for rates of mental health conditions and suicide. So, yeah, we just need to consider how all of that mental load is can factor in for impaired decision making. And so again, we heard that, we're using the firefighter on the ground's brain as the computer for making these decisions. And sadly, they're overtaxed. And if you're overtaxed, you might make bad decisions or ill-informed ones. Or sometimes they do a great job, but it can definitely make it challenging. And we also heard, it can be a barrier to this idea of creative thought that's necessary for operational planning and pre-planning if your basic physiological and safety needs are not being met. And so we talked about and heard about, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I think many of us are familiar with this, is the idea that when your physiological needs, the basic ones such as food, water, rest, and in this situation, air, is not being met, and then your safety needs are not being met, then it's harder to get to that level of thinking where you have to multitask and you have to pre-plan, and you just won't necessarily have the capacity to be able to do that, and to be able to do that quickly, and to switch and reprioritize what you need to do. I'll hand it over to Maisie.
Oh, okay, sorry. I was struggling to unmute myself. But anyways, so we also learned that there's a lot of hesitation when it comes to adopting new technologies for several reasons, including the culture of the fire service, the lack of awareness about current technologies, and the cost of implementing new technologies. And I will go through each of these factors individually. So the first one is culture. The fire service generally has a culture that seeks to preserve its status quo and encourages things like tradition, loyalty, rule following, and fostering this brotherhood-like mentality. And then additionally, the way that the incident command system is structured is very top-down hierarchy. And so they really value seniority and authority for people at the top of the system. And so you can see this quote saying, I don't need a smartphone, I don't need this technology, and we've been fighting fires for decades, so they're rooted in the old ways of doing things. And while this type of culture builds a really close-knit community like that of a family, it also fosters a us versus them mentality that is really hard to convince for change, especially when you're not part of that same group. And so you can see here an incident commander told us, as soon as you standardize anything, you're going to get pushback because they're like, oh, well, we use this and it works for us. So every group is going to believe that the way that they do things are the best way or sufficient enough to get the job done. So they don't see the value of adopting alternative methods or technologies. But I do want to point out there is current work to shift the fire culture from the less following of rules and traditions into more of a learning culture to give individuals more freedom, more autonomy in how decisions are being made and how things are done. The second factor is that there's just limited knowledge for what technologies are out there. And in order for new technologies to emerge in the fire service, people need to know what type of technologies exist. And beyond the existence of the technologies, they need to believe that it has the potential to be valuable and beneficial to them. And even beyond that, they need to perceive that this benefit or value of adopting something new or changing something outweighs the effort, the training, and all the other sacrifices they need to achieve that change. Because at the end of the day, responders don't have all the time in the world to try to figure out how to use something when what they use, like radios, work majority of the time. So one participant told us, if a thing didn't work within the first 5 minutes, I was going to throw it away and just keep going because, I have a real world emergency to be responding to. And then the third factor is that the fire service is associated with the government, which means that there's a lot of red tape involved when adopting any type of technologies. So that means a lot of negotiations, a lot of agreements with adherence to rules and formalities at different levels of the government. And this means that the process of change is really, really slow. In addition to that, it also costs money to adopt technology because the government is really cautious and conservative when it comes to spending taxpayers' money on. And then even if they decide to adopt something, then there's also a cost associated with implementing it. So we talked to a person from the California Governor's Office who said adopting new tech costs money for all levels of government. And so if we look at it from a systems perspective, we can see that all these factors that I just talked about are really connected. For example, if we start at the top with the fact that there isn't enough money in the fire service to upgrade the current system, so then they're just going to keep using the same tools and processes, which may hinder the ability for them to contain the fires as they grow larger and more severe. So then the money is spent on reacting to these fires to try to contain them. And then the cycle just repeats itself. So it's a never-ending cycle. We also learned that there's a lot of information available, but the lack of interoperability makes it difficult to transfer accurate information between different groups. And what we mean by interoperability is that it's the ability for different systems and platforms to communicate, exchange, and use information without any type of restrictions. So we know that people are already using third-party apps like Avenza, Gaia, and Collector Maps, which are all consumer apps you can find on your app store. And responders use them to help them navigate on the fireground. But these apps lack the ability to communicate with other platforms and tools. And we know that there isn't a centralized information sharing system. So it becomes really important to be able to have different systems to be able to talk to each other. So for example, you can see this person saying, there's never going to be a one-stop shop for information sharing or anything. Software-wise, there's never going to be one software program that's going to work for everyone or work for every situation. The biggest thing is finding software programs that have a way of federating data between themselves so you can share information from one type of platform to another. So essentially, because of the wide variety of use in different consumer apps and the lack of a single centralized information system, people aren't able to communicate information consistently across platforms. We also learned that the lack of familiarity with technology creates a barrier for people to adopt new technologies. Like Rand mentioned earlier, we conducted a competitive analysis that looked at all the different types of communication and resource tracking systems that are either one designed for emergency services like the fire service, or other tools that we heard from our participants that they've used on their own on the ground. And what we learned is that while there's a lot of existing products and services that have tried to address the issues of communication and resource tracking, none of them are widely adopted, even though the functionalities of some of these tools could really benefit them on the fire ground. And we asked our participants why this was the case, and two general themes arise. So the first being what I talked about earlier, people are just not aware of what exists out there. And when we mentioned some of these tools to participants, some would recognize them, and then other people would be like, I have never even heard of them. And what this also means is that there's no standard use of a particular platform. There's no training or lessons that require everyone to use a particular tool, so they're kind of left with what they know best. So one person says, we have trouble getting people to go to the free system that the government has built for them. That's better than all the other systems like Google or Esri or Apple has built. But people will still migrate to those because it's kind of what they know. It's like brand name recognition. And the second factor being that there's this perception that technology is really advanced and complex and beyond the scope of their job and abilities. They may feel like they're just like not tech savvy enough and worried that because they're not savvy, maybe technology is going to fail them rather than help them. And so this lack of knowledge and understanding about technology really limits people's motivation to try and adopt new things. So here you can see this person says it's technology that not a lot of people understand or think is too advanced that only the military can use, but that's not really the case. Or another person told us, people complain about technology is hard to try and understand and grasp, especially in the fire service. And this person points out the irony of how people can figure out how to use a smartphone, which is way more complex with way more functionalities than a two-way radio, and yet still perceive technology as this big complicated thing. And our last insight is kind of obvious, but fighting wildland fire is really intricate and dynamic task. The fire situation can change rapidly, which requires responders to come up with new tactical strategies in a short amount of time. And because fire behavior is so dynamic and can change rapidly from one moment to the next, the ability for responders to adapt to the changing circumstances is really important. For example, an incident meteorologist said, weather can change very rapidly and it could change the course of the fire. So responders have to be able to assess the situation with information that's given to him and the information that's around him and in front of him. And since information gets outdated as changes occur throughout the day, it's really paramount to have up-to-date information in order to gain an accurate representation of the situation. And this is called situational awareness. So you can see here, a smoke jumper told us it's a very dynamic environment. The maps that you get in the morning are totally different in 2 hours anyways. So you have to use your own situational awareness and experience to determine what is actually going on the ground. And so having accurate and up-to-date situational awareness not only allows responders to understand what is happening, but it also allows them to make informed decisions about how to proceed and then help them anticipate the future consequences of those decisions. And this person told us the ability to have real-time infrared data in the hands of firefighters would be paramount. It would have a night and day difference in operating decisions if they could see it in real time.
Okay, time for the hell might we. So click to start through. Okay, I'm gonna click and hope nothing well, I'll click later. Okay, So considering all of our insights, we came to this how might we statement. How might we improve the personal safety of firefighters by providing real-time location data at different levels of the incident command system? We know that location data is critical, and we know that different people need different levels of data and can provide different types of data. So our next challenge would be to understand what level of data people need and where the data would come from. Oh, it worked. Okay. Now I'd like to introduce our design principles, which also comes from our research insights. These would be our priorities and values during the design process, and they would be easy adoption, to consider human factors, must have interoperability, and be redundant. So for number one, easy adoption. In wildland fire, there's already a lot of rules, regulations, training, and experience already in place. We need to come up with a design that would be easy to implement and seamlessly blend into the work that firefighters do. It should be as easy for new firefighters to adopt as senior firefighters. For number two, consider the human factors. We have many things to consider. A division supervisor could be keeping track of a million things in their heads, and their performance could be affected by tech that needs too much attention. Or we could think about firefighters on the ground already hiking with 40+ pounds of equipment and doing manual labor for 16 hours a day, needing to keep situational awareness at the same time. We need to be considerate of each category of personnel and understand their particular situations. For number three, we must have interoperability. This is critical when you have 3,000+ firefighters showing up at camp from all different agencies on a state, local, and federal level. They need to be able to communicate and share information together in order to work together effectively. For our last design principle, be redundant. In every situation, especially ones with risks like wildland fire, something unexpected is always going to happen. Any design needs to have a contingency plan if it fails. Now for design opportunities. Things that we think would be worth focusing in on are promoting safety and well-being, logistics support, and providing tactical support. In promoting safety and well-being, a potential direction could include highlighting personnel safety and mental and physical well-being. And in supporting logistics, we can use real-time map data to support logistics such as personnel checking in and out, what supplies they need, how long they've been on the line, what expertise they have, food supplies, fuel, etc. And for our third design opportunity, it could be useful to provide tactical support to create useful information for incident commanders, incident management teams, and supervisors to support operations via real-time maps of where the fire line is, where personnel and teams are, and weather updates. So we just covered the research portion of our project, which is what we did this past spring quarter. And now let's look ahead to what we're going to be doing in the summer. So basically from June 22nd through August 20th, the four of us will have 11 weeks to come up with a product for Wildland Fire. We'll have the initial ideation and prototyping, a testing phase, and then we'll be working on the final design. For our summer wish list, we'd love to put together a design workshop to ideate with people in the wildland fire space doing co-design. We'd also love to experience wildland fire in person, whether it's a complex fire camp, fire training, and other in-person experiences. And of course, we'd love to meet more people in wildland fire to expand our perspectives and knowledge bases. So if anyone knows anyone that can help us make these things happen, we'd be eternally grateful. Thank you. And also, we're vaccinated and we're willing to travel. So there's that. And now we've reached the discussion portion of the presentation. We've talked a lot and we'd love to hear from you. And I'll briefly introduce two discussion topics and then open it up to discussion and Q&A at the same time. Okay, so here's the first discussion topic, and it's also the big elephant in the room. It's connectivity and funding. We know there's sketchy to no internet out in the wilderness and wildland fire space. So, and it doesn't get its fair share of funding. So how much do you think we should let the reality of funding and connectivity guide our design? And since it's a real world constraint, I mean, that's a pretty big deal. But then at the same time, our design options would be severely limited if we did something that was both low cost and didn't require any connectivity. So just a thought for that one. And then for the second topic, should we design for the present or should we design for the future? And if it's for the future, how far in the future should we design this? And if it's for the present, we definitely have to design with all the current constraints in mind. But if we design for the future, we'd assume some of these current issues were solvable or had already been solved. So I've condensed the two discussion topics here. And then also feel free to ask any questions or make comments. Some ways we can do this is feel free to just unmute and speak up. Or you can also write in the chat or raise your Zoom hand and we can facilitate this discussion. Okay, go.
All right, well, I will kick it off. First, I just want to say congratulations, guys. I know you're halfway done, you're not all the way done, but it's been such a pleasure to work with all of you and see how you've worked through this space. When we came to you as advisors with the project, we knew that this is a very tough problem space. Like you mentioned that consumer applications are things that are being used here. Like I think the differences between designing a consumer application in the marketplace for folks to just download and use on their smartphone and solving really wicked design problems in a like really tough space that has severe consequences really just speaks to how well all of you have been able to like take on this problem space and dive into the complexity. So one of the things we've talked about throughout this quarter is the fact that it's really broad, the fact that there's a lot of places to look, and the fact that like in order to come out with a design solution here, you're going to need to narrow and get close and like refine what exactly you're targeting here. And so I'm really curious to hear from you. Like you started with communication, but then really talked a lot around this personnel tracking. And it feels like we've kind of come to this like middling place where it's like communication, but around personnel tracking. So talk to me a little bit about how you thought about the process of narrowing and how you aim to keep your like ideation like tightly confined as you move into the next phase.
Monty and Macy, do you want to take this one?
Sure. I mean, I can start. I think that's one of the biggest struggles we're having right now, and you know that we've had and we're continuing to have is how to narrow and pinpoint something that we can realistically design for in the next 2 months. That's all we have, really. And I think when we were narrowing it down, we ended up either going towards, and you were in these discussions as well, so we were thinking personnel tracking and decision making and something about real-time information. And I think we're really, like, it still is very interconnected, because if it doesn't make sense to do just one thing in isolation, right? If we're saying personnel tracking, it's not like you're doing it for the sake of knowing like exactly just where the people are. There's a whole bunch of things attached to that. We want to know where the people are because we want to be able to keep them safe, because we need to make operational decisions, and because we want to support some of this decision making. So, I mean, maybe my answer is like, we still don't quite know yet, but yeah, I think that we don't know yet. Maybe that just is the answer. I don't know if anybody else has thoughts on that, but I, for one, am still grappling with, like, I think the meaning behind focusing on what we need to do is to consider all those big like things that need to happen, right? I don't know if anybody has anything to add.
I mean, I'll contribute and just say that having great work, great research, and great foundation to work from. It seems like you're already focusing on the areas that you need to be thinking about for your narrowing, and that is the business aspects of this. You know, the funding, what's realistic, what are the technical constraints, and the time frame they're aiming for. So you might need to find some other inputs to help you even decide what decisions to make in those areas to begin with. And then once you've put planted your stake as far as what time frame, what's possible as far as funding, those types of things, then that would help you narrow, I think. But you might have several levels of decisions to make to begin with.
Thank you. I guess the other thing that brings up to mind for me too is like measuring, right, the impact that we can make, and that might be quantifiable measurements, but also, of course, other ways to know what sort of a difference we're making. And that would be a question I think we would want to go back to our SMEs or subject matter experts. And I know we have some of them on the line right now. I don't know if anybody has ideas to add right now, but like, you know, how do we know that we're making a difference?
Hey, this is Alan Yoshida. Great job, guys. I think you definitely.
Yeah, and I would actually like the subject matter.
I think you definitely dialed in on some good topics there. Oh, I think locked up or.
We can hear you, Alan. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So cost, your question on cost and design constraints. I would say don't gold plate what you're trying to do. Just design to what they need. Define what they need. So that should be part of your narrowing process, which they need situational awareness to make operational decisions. So if you look at their processes and methodologies, they're very analog, they're very human error prone, things like that. That then equals waste. So if you start taking a look at business processes, the waste that occurs by human error, the waste that occurs by overestimating or underestimating resource requirements and things like that. So I'd say plan a design that leverages things that save money and save time. Weight them as appropriate. Don't weight one more over the other, because situational awareness and timely operational decision-making should be the goal, my opinion. Your time frame or your time horizon, I would say aim at 2 years out. So where is the technology today and where will it be in 2 years? And what type of activities or functions or functionality needs to occur within now and 2 years? Why do I say 2 years? Because a lot of times it takes that long to go through the congressional processes. If it's a congressional thing, go through the state processes. If it's a state thing, give yourself a little time, because 6 months too fast, unless there's a massive pending need. The nation mobilized decently well at $2.6 trillion for COVID, but that impacted the whole world. Localized fires on a few states, totally different level of criticality. So be criticality appropriate. Those are my 2 recommendations relative to your questions or your desired questions and inputs. So thanks, and thanks for presenting it. Very well done. And there's probably some people in the Forestry Service who could use your slides to help educate their leadership and start painting the picture, because I don't know if they totally grasp it, but you graphically did a great job describing it.
Thank you, Alan. And anyone is definitely welcome to our slides. We can share with whoever wants them. Hopefully they can be toward a good cause.
So that actually points to sort of a 3-pronged approach of deciding what thing is really important to come out of your project. I could see that there's one avenue is to look at what set of resources that you have researched would be most beneficial to hand over as information to agencies who can go do something on their own about it. The second thing is to think about like that you would want to put into your portfolio a great project that shows that you can actually solve problems. And that's somewhat selfish, but an objective to think about. And then the third objective is to think about like actually producing a product that will actually do the good. And like any one of those three might be a viable avenue. And that's something that I'd love to hear from the stakeholders. Like, is a presentation that sets the problem on the right foot a really important thing that they need? Or is it that they just need the solution? Or is it that like, this is a great thing and hopefully you can get a good portfolio piece out of it? Sorry, Vidya.
No, go on. Hey, Joanne, Maisie, Fontaine, and Ran, it was just wonderful. You know how much you sound like an insider? I think that kind of confidence comes from the diligence of the work you have shown. I had so many aha moments. I learned a lot. I know nothing about this domain. And I definitely want to say there was a lot of sophistication in how you presented it, as well as when you brought in the causal loops from systems thinking. It inspires so much confidence. And it's not just insights, but it's not great storytelling, but it was insights with soul, with all the personal stories and the way you weaved in the specific verbatim. It was so well done. I'm taking so many pointers away from it. So I want to start there. I did give some frames to decide. What you're asking is a very important and a hard question to ask. Not a lot of people will ask that. Okay, we have done all this and we want to do something, but is it really going to be used? And is this, is it just going to be an academic project? It's a very worthy question to ask. So something that can help you is the 3 frames that I have given in the chat. So one of them is, which is very close to Lauren and others have also suggested. So you can see that in the chat. I don't want to belabor that point. I do think as far as your question is concerned, I would choose to, I would recommend to do something for the near future for right now, because far in the future is always a little dicey. And it's also choosing to answer taking the easier path. The harder part is to answer this one. And I think I have no doubt that you are the best people to answer the first question. So I'm recommending you to take the hard one, even though I'm not going to be, doing it, but extremely well done. This is my personal high for Wednesday. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Great comments. We'll definitely take your 3 frames to narrow down and run with it. Thank you. I am seeing that we're getting a little close to time, so we can take a couple more comments and questions, and then I'll wrap us up.
First of all, I really enjoyed the presentation, and at the same time also feel very sad. I feel like those are kind of people who really need something to help them to do their job, but in fact, no one really knows how to give them the right tool to do the things in the right way. And even though there's already a lot of people encourage you guys to design things for the near future or like for the current right now, but I actually would really encourage you guys to do something more like idealistic or like for the far future. Because you guys mentioned that like there are companies and people, designers that have been thinking about this problem for a very long time. However, those firefighters are still doing the things almost the same as like 70 years ago. And I don't know what have been designed for them within those 70 years, but seems like none of those kind of design really works for them. And even though you guys mentioned that you want to provide some like real-time information kind of system for them, however, I feel like this is still the same. Like they are still like passively receive the information with provided by the technology or like by others. And those kind of information is critical to them. And what if they can somehow get those more information, not in the passive way, but more like in intuitive way? And this is not like the only design, like if you only fix one part of the entire system, it's not going to fix the entire, like the framework. And there's also a problem. You guys mentioned that some information from one platform is not allowed to share in the other platform. And there's also like political like constraints. And I just feel like it's very hard for our designers to solve those kind of like level of the challenges. And it's kind of hard to, if you just, I don't know, I feel like if you can imagine something like the black box, just imagine that is what work in the future, then how other parties going to come all together based on that kind of fundamental black box you guys imagined. And that's why I would really encourage you guys to design something for the future, even though it's probably not going to help those firefighters right now, but in the future, it might provide some idea for them. Or like in the future, when other people look back, they found ideas you guys provided, and then with the technology by that time, they can start implementing something for the firefighters in the future. And there's actually another point I kind of confused. I really, like, even though you guys mentioned that, but I still don't get why people is so important during the entire firefighting process. Seems like the human factor is a biggest problem there. And how can we like include less a part of the human in this process to not only keep themselves, but also make it more easier for the entire authority to fight the fire.
Oh, Harry, you bring up a lot of really great points, right? Because I feel like we will never be able to design for the far future in industry. And I think that's interesting. Like, where do these far future ideas come from? Is it like sci-fi novels? Is it academia? Like, that's kind of an interesting thought. I wonder if anyone from Wildland Fire has anything to say about that. That would be interesting to hear. David.
So I guess, looking back in my career, and I think we all envisioned or wanted tools that some of the things that I find myself doing now, I will say, man, those are the things we dreamed of 20 years ago. So I think just asking people, like, what would the perfect system look like? What kind of things, what kind of information would you want? And so one of the things I think might be relatively or potentially doable in a short time frame is looking at how to automate the process of delineating linear features on maps, because that's how we fight fires. We're always looking for where is the easiest place to contain the fire. What is going to be the, what has the, like, if you want to do a cost path analysis, how can I contain this fire the easiest, quickest, and safest way? So looking at all those linear features and being able to automate the process of delineating those on a map would be hugely beneficial. And I think there's enough technology now to make it doable, but no one's come up with that yet.
Yeah, I think it's on the horizon for with our competitive analysis. Yeah, but we'll have a couple more minutes to chat. I'm gonna first close us out real quick. So let's get to the last screen somehow. Oh, there it is. Okay. So I'm going to wrap us up. On behalf of our team, I'd like to thank the Wildland Fire community for their willingness to help us learn about this extremely complex space, and that it was also such a privilege to get to know everyone. And we're looking forward to getting to know everyone a lot better next quarter. So everyone we've met working in Wildland Fire is making huge sacrifices and doing such a huge service to protecting our land and our people. And we're very glad to be able to help shed some more light on the topic of wildland fire, and proud to bring it to the world of HCI and design thinking. And now I'll close out our talk by saying thank you all so much for coming. It means a lot to us to see you all here supporting us in this journey. And I hope you've enjoyed our talk, and we'll be staying on for the next 10 or 15 minutes if anyone wants to stay and chat. So thank you so much. And then everyone are free to go if you want, or you can stay and chat for a little longer. Thank you. Okay, and I'm gonna stop remote control. Oh, Judith is here. Hello, Judith. Welcome.
Thank you. I hope I'm not on mute.
Oh, no, you're not on mute. We can hear you. It's so good to have you join us.
Oh, absolutely, Joan. And you had on my list, I had you on my list to email you back, but it may be too late, but I